We're going to talk about the middle of year Acadience data. And this is for both reading and math. So they're very similar within the system. So as we go through today, we may share some uh, specific things that might be different between the two, but for the most part, they're going to be the same. And we're focusing on looking at this data as a teacher or as a coach who helps teachers. Um, there we are. I think, at least for Rich, you were here yesterday and you know who we are. But I'm Jared Wright, Elementary Math and Science Assessment Specialist. I work with the RISE assessment and also Acadience Math. And I'll let Dallas introduce herself.
And I am Dallas Brooks, and I work with the RISE ELA assessment or the reading assessment and the writing assessment for RISE in grade 5. And I also work with Acadience reading. So thank you for being here today. And just like Jared said, thank you so much for your patience and for just being kind to us as we got things figured out this morning. So we're happy to work with you. Excited to see you all here today.
Okay, today our learning intention is being able to look at the Acadience reports and look at that student data that were provided, specifically looking at that beginning of year to middle of year. As far as whether we're successful and you're successful, as we go through today, we're going to be analyzing student composite scores, the effectiveness of instruction, pathways of progress, we'll talk about that, and then thinking about what are the next instructional steps as we go from middle of year to the end of the year. All right, so kind of to that point, the middle of the year is that checkpoint to see, okay, how are we doing and what needs to change or what should we keep doing in order to be successful by the end of the year. And you hopefully have seen this model before, and you'll notice on the model it says Acadience reading. This is one that also applies to math, just this the idea of um, the benchmark assessment and then progress monitoring, which then feeds back into the benchmark assessment cycle. And today we're focusing on 1 and 5 specifically, reviewing the outcomes and then identifying any needs that you might have going forward. So our first one, we're going to take a look at the composite score. So the composite score is a very high level score, as you're aware, with multiple measures or probes that feed into that score. And let's see, we have in the, we'll go through this form, but you have this form also in the participant notebook. You'll see that there's one for reading and one for math, depending on the data that you'd like to look at today. This example is grade 1. It could be any grade that that is administered the test, and then you're really looking or comparing the beginning of the year to the middle of the year, and looking at how have the students on those performance levels, are they above, at, below, or well below, and kind of give that comparison. So you have the top row is looking at beginning of the year. And so percentages of students who are at or above at the beginning of the year and those that are below or well below, and then kind of pulling those out and putting them into percentages and number of students. And then the second row is looking at the middle of the year, students that are at or above, and students who are below or well below percentage, and then pulling those out to kind of see what that looks like. And really, we're trying to answer the question or think about the question, is the core instruction effective? So is our whole class instruction without applying any small group supports? Is that being effective or not? And then the way we're defining effective is at least 80% of students are at or above with those benchmarks. So what we're going to use, we have the composite score reports. Kelsey or Lindsay, do either of you, do you use ALO or do you use ADM for math?
So I'm new to the district. So this is, I'm just kind of trying to get familiar with everything. So let me look really quick. Let me pull it up. I
Yeah, no
had it
problem.
pull up.
And if
There.
you're here to look at reading, then you don't even need to worry about that. So it's only if you're looking at the math data.
Looking at math. Okay, let's see. I don't actually know. I don't know how to find it.
Kelsey, what
Okay.
grade do you teach?
I'm a special ed teacher, so I teach all grades.
Okay, so do you administer the Acadience math assessment?
I haven't yet because I'm so new. So this is, I'm just trying to get my feet wet and trying to get all the, I've been in high school for 11 years, so this is all new to me.
Okay, perfect. And then sorry, just one more question.
Mhm.
What district or charter are you in?
I'm with Park City School District.
Okay, okay,
That's ALO.
perfect.
You're with
That's
ALO.
ALO.
Yeah.
That's what I
Okay,
was thinking
thank
too.
you.
Yeah, no, that's good. And sorry, that that question kind of complicated things when in reality I was trying to simplify. But so we have ALO and ADM, and the majority of school districts and charter schools are using ALO because reading is ALO, and so the majority did that for math as well. So we will focus on ALO. There's a student list view, and then there's the main dashboard. Are two reports that you can use to see the composite scores. And before we say it's your turn, let me go to ALO, and I'll just jump in to show how you can get to that. So if you're new to ALO, you'll come to a dashboard when you log in. It probably would look different since this is a demo site that I'm using, but it will have the grade levels, and then in the top left corner is reading, and then that's where you can change to math depending on the data that you want to see. And then you would select, make sure you're on the grade level. So this is the dashboard view. And for this demo school, it shows me the number of students is this 377. If you're a classroom teacher, you would see your class. And so obviously this would be a much smaller number. And then as you hover over the colors, it tells you the number of students as well as the percentage of students that are falling in that performance level. And so you can hover there to see the number and the percentage as you go through to work on that worksheet. And as Dallas put in the chat, there's also the A in the top left corner that you can use. Then also if you, well, let's go to just a student view. So if I go to middle of the year or beginning of the, oh, mine's really slow. So I can select the time of year over here, and then over on the, just right after the student name is where I would see the composite score. And I can sort that, and I can filter for whatever performance level I'm looking for. So there's different ways that you can sort it, but that's where the composite score, if I'm looking for individual students. But as far as the overall you probably the best option is going here to this dashboard. Also, if you are someone that like to print reports rather than use them on the computer, rather than hovering, if you do the print function, so if that's Control P or right click in a print, it will bring up this information in well, format looking like this format down here in the bottom of the slide, where it lists out the percentages and numbers of students within those categories. So that's where you see that is if you do the print function to print out the page. Are there any questions about getting to those reports, whether it's the student list view or the main dashboard, to be able to look at student composite scores for beginning and for middle of the year? All right, we will give you 8 minutes. We're still here. We're not going anywhere. So if you have questions or need help trying to find something, we can definitely help you through that. And we'll go through these 8 minutes and then come back together to talk about it. Welcome, Mark. Sorry if you got the link that wasn't working. Glad you got one that works now.
Thank you.
I just put in the chat a link to the participant notebook that you can use. We are looking at the data for composite scores and looking at the participant notebook page 2 or 3, so for reading or for math. And you can just select a grade um, and a class, or however you want to work through that. And if you need help getting to a particular report, we can do that as well in looking at those composite scores. All right. We'll come back together. Just uh, let's see. I'm just going to pull up all the bullet points. So a couple things about tier one instruction as we're looking at those, um, and really focusing on the data that we were comparing between beginning of year and middle of the year, and what those percentages look like. Um, so all students are assessed at benchmark universal instruction for all students. So this is everyone's just receiving the same instruction at this point. Whole class, small group, and then you can see the times as far as recommendations uh, related to literacy, including writing, and then also math. So let's see, so in the participant notebook on page 4 are 4 different, well, there's a couple questions for each one, but there's 4 different lines there. So looking at your data, did your scores increase, decrease, stay the same, etc. For which groups of students? What actions did you take that led to success? And then how are you going to replicate that coming up? And then if there was a drop in scores, what might have been happening? And then based on those scores, are the students who are receiving interventions the only students that need it? Are there other students that might need interventions coming, or are there some that maybe don't need it anymore moving forward? So those reflection questions are on page 4. We'll just take about 5 minutes to look at those questions and fill those out. There, and if you haven't, in the chat, there is a link to the participant notebook with those questions. Okay, let's go on to, all right, so we had breakout room listed here. But we're not gonna, this will be our breakout room. So in thinking about this question, we'd like you to either come off mute or just put it in the chat, either way. But what, as you were looking at and analyze the composite score and then also reflecting on what might have gone well or what maybe you're going to do for from middle of year to end of year, what next steps are you going to take or could you take to address things uh, to help students whose scores either decreased or stayed the same? Or if you have some thoughts to share with someone else, what might you share with someone else?
Another idea here too is if you noticed possibly like a decline and you want some help in just generating some ideas, we can do that as well. So anything up to this point that you have questions about, or even if you just want help with brainstorming.
All right. Well, I'm going to go with the wait time. So,
It looks like Tara did put in the
oh,
chat.
nice. I missed something. There we go. Okay, couple, yeah. Oh, all right. I'm off mute. Yeah, so thank you for putting those things in the chat. So focusing on skills that they need help with. And maybe you have a large percentage of students at in the class level, so you could just provide that help a whole class or tier one. And then Mark mentioned looking at the scores. Um, yeah, I think being aware of data is helpful. Because sometimes we feel like we're doing good or we're not doing as good as we think we should be, and having the data to help us understand what's really going on can be helpful. So sharing that school-wide can, or with the grade levels and so on, can be very helpful. All right, next, here we go. I am going to stop sharing.
Perfect. Thank you, Jared. Give us just a second. We're going to switch over and share it to my screen. But Mark, I love that you are multitasking. That's something that as educators, we always have to do. Um, hey, Jared, it is telling me that the host isn't allowing sharing for this meeting. Do you want to either make me a co-host or, I mean, I can just tell you when to click if you want.
Uh,
But then also with Rich School District, focusing on those schools that they need help with and finding interventions. Hopefully, we have some more things that we're going to go through in this training, and then we're going to look at some instructional planning. So hopefully that will also help with that as well as we continue on.
you should have be able to share now.
Perfect. There we go. That worked. All right. Thank you so much. Okay, so we are going to look at effectiveness of instructional support now. So the report that we're going to look at tracks how specific groups of students moved from beginning of year to middle of year. And it really just helps to break down your systems of support so you can determine how effective your instruction really has been from beginning of year to middle of year here. So you're going to start by looking at students who were well below or below benchmark at beginning of year. So for these students, we need to ask ourselves, are our supports on track to move at least 80% of these students up a level by the end of the year? So that's kind of that big goal, is taking those students who had a red or yellow composite score and moving a really big chunk, 80% of them up a level by EOY. You can track the students that are remaining stagnant by using this report, which I love it so much. So on the screen here is an example of a class that we're going to look at. So I have my red students, and I'm going to show you how to access this report on ALO in just a second, but we have our red students here, and this is beginning of year. We are just tracking to see how they moved from beginning of year to middle of the year. So it tells me that I had 9 total students who had a red composite score. And then looking at middle of year, I can see how those students move. So 6 of those students, or 67% of them, remained red. So they didn't move up the level, that goal that we're looking for to move up. They did not. They kind of remained stagnant here. 2 of those students, or 22%, moved up to yellow. So that's a great move for them. We want to see them progressing. 1 of my students here moved from a red to a green. So that is phenomenal to see. And then I didn't have any students move from a red at beginning of year to blue at middle of year, which is pretty common to see. That's a really big jump for them to be taking. And we're really just looking for students to be moving up. So in my participant notebook, I would go ahead and list those students. So these are my 6 students who were red at BOY and stayed red at MOY. I'm going to list those 2 students who moved up to yellow, my 1 student that moved to green, and then I'm not going to list anything here on my blue because I didn't have any students move. So then I can really target those students that didn't make any movement in their composite scores. And whatever I'm doing with these students, I want to continue doing with those students because it's working for them. Same with my below benchmark students. So I'm going to track. So remember, using the effectiveness report, it takes where they were at beginning of year. So I had 3 students who were yellow at the beginning of year and seeing how they are moving for middle of year. So as you can see here, I didn't have any students go from yellow to red. So that's excellent. We never want our students to slide backwards. I had 1 student stay yellow, so I'm going to write that student's name in right here, Sawyer, he stayed yellow. And then I had 2 students move up to that green. So again, just kind of getting some ideas of which of my students are moving, which of my students aren't moving, that maybe I need to change some things in the next couple of days or weeks to help them to move where we want them to move for end of year. We are also going to do that same thing with our students who are at benchmark and above benchmark at beginning of year. We want to look to see the movement that they made from beginning of year to middle of year. For these students, effective instruction really should hold 100% of these students where they were at. So they really shouldn't be slipping backwards. So as you can see on my example here, I had 1 student who was green at beginning of year. And that student, who's Sarah, I wrote her name here, she went down to red. So that's going to be very concerning to me as a teacher, that she started at green BOY, and whatever has happened to MOY, she has slipped down to red. So I really want to be intensive and looking at what's happening with her. And then I'm going to track my other students just to make sure that they're staying where they're at. So remember, those at and above students really should be staying at least where they're at or moving up. So I had 2 students who stayed green, and I had 1 student who moved up to blue. So Savannah here, she moved up to blue. Ryan and Ortiz, they stayed in my green here. And if they're at benchmark beginning of year and they stay at benchmark middle of year, that's okay. We still want to be pushing to get them into that blue, but we really just want to make sure they're not slipping backwards. Same thing with my blue students here. So I had 10 blue students at BOY. Three of them slipped down into that green. So those three, I'm probably going to want to take a closer look at what's happening with Grace, Pedro, and Mikkel here because I don't want them to slip backwards. If they started blue, we should be able to keep them blue for the next benchmark. And then I did have 7 students who started blue and they stayed blue. So that's awesome. So on ALO, I am going to pull this up to show you where you are going to go to look at the effectiveness of instructional support. So just like what Jared was showing earlier, you're going to have this dashboard that you want to go to. If you don't see this dashboard, if you're seeing a student list, you just click on that A in the corner. It will take you to the dashboard. If you are a teacher and you have just one classroom in here, you won't have to worry about this step. But if you are an instructional coach or if you're an admin, you're probably going to want to filter your students here. To filter your students, you'll just have these 3 columns up in the corner. Click on that, and that will allow you to choose between the classes and the students that you have. So I am just going to go and look at a first grade class here. Here's our benchmarks that we went over earlier. And then my effectiveness of instructional support, I just have to scroll down a little bit to see those students. Make sure that you have beginning of year to middle of year listed here, and then you've got your students. So these are cohorts of students. These are my students who started red at beginning of year. I had 10 of them, and then I can track their progress to see how they moved. If I hover over those color blocks, it will tell me specifically the number of students. So I had 1 student who went from red to yellow, and it will also list the name of that student. So Scott was my student who went from red to yellow. If I hover over my green, it tells me that I had 4 students go from red to green, and it lists those 4 students for me. And then again, hovering over my blue, I had 5 students go from red to blue. Those 5 students are listed. I may have to scroll if there's a few of them. You can also always click on the view details, and that will take you to the students' assessments to get a better idea of what those students were doing. So we're going to look at that for each of our cohorts. So we've got our students who started red at BOY, our students who started yellow at BOY, students who were green and blue at BOY. So we're going to give you about 8 minutes to fill out your participant notebook, looking at that effectiveness report. So we are on page 5 for reading or page 6 for math. So you can look at either one. If you have enough time, you are welcome to fill that in for both. I'm going to go ahead and start that timer for the 8 minutes. Again, Jared and I are here if you have any questions or need any help as you're looking at this data.
Dallas, I have a question for you.
Yes,
As
please.
a special education teacher, so I do first grade through 5th grade at the school. Is there a way to make my own, like with my caseload, or do I have to go in teacher by teacher to do that?
So what you could do, Kelsey, is create a group of students. Let me see if I can remember how to do this. Because sometimes so my guess, Kelsey, you have an ALO account, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so when you go in, you are going to have this students tab. So what you would do is click onto your students, and then each of them have these little radial dials next to their name. So you would just click on the radial dial of, oh, that's not working for me. Give me 1 second to play with it. It
Okay.
always takes me a second to remember how to create groups. And Jared, if you remember how, you can jump on too.
Yeah, you were in the right place. So go to a student and then yeah, you can click there or you can click way at the top.
Why
Um,
is it not giving me, because it's just telling me to enroll in monitoring? Is it just because I'm on the demo account?
yeah, it's probably the account that you've got. Try switching to a time of year. Does that matter? I
I
don't
see
think.
it on my screen where if I click on some students, I see that thing pop down on the bottom and it
Yeah,
says create a group. Is that what I do?
yeah.
Perfect. Yep. Yep. You're going to create a group there and then you can name it and you can put any of your students in that group. And then it would pull up for you within right here when you see classes and groups. If you click on that, it's going to show you your group. I think that's what I did wrong. I was on a
Well,
district view rather than a school view.
and Dallas, on if you want to go back to that list, so you have classes and groups, and then you
Hmm.
need to switch it to groups.
Right here.
Yeah, and
Yep.
then you would see it, whatever you
Did
named.
yeah. Did you see that, Kelsey?
Great. Yes, I did. Thank you. Thank you guys.
Yep, of course. Thanks, Jared, for the assist.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Our time is winding down. We've got about 30 seconds left, so go ahead and wrap up the last data point you were looking at. Mark, thank you for sharing those screenshots in the chat. I know for me personally, it can be so helpful to see things visually and laid out with all of the color coding. So I'm sure that will be a huge help to your teachers. Okay, so now that we have filled in those charts, it's really crucial to be able to see exactly which students have moved and which ones didn't move. That's what is really going to help us target our instruction moving forward. So we need to be able to understand proficiency and growth. Proficiency is a student's benchmark status. That's where they are. Growth is their pathway, which just means how fast they are moving towards the goals that they have. And we really want to be looking at these together. So we've got our 4 quadrants here. These are kind of the areas that our students end up landing in. The top 2 boxes are students who make low growth, and honestly, we never want that. We want all of our students to be making growth no matter where their proficiency is at. So with this top right box, that's even students who have high proficiency, but they're still making low growth. That's something that we don't want to see. We want to see even our students with high proficiency still growing and making the growth that they need to. In the bottom corner here, we have students who have a low proficiency but high growth, and that is totally okay. Sometimes we can't control where our students come in with us, but what we can control is that they are growing and they are working towards those goals that are set for them. But ultimately, we really want students to hit this last quadrant right here, which is high growth combined with a high level of proficiency. So just keep in mind to be looking at both of those that we've looked at, their growth and their composite scores, their proficiency. We haven't quite looked at pathways of progress yet, but we are going to get there. So just a reminder that when we are comparing students' growth, we are comparing students with other students who began at the exact same place. So for the example here, Janie started with a composite score of 90. So when we are looking at her pathway of progress, we are only comparing her to other students who also started with a composite score of 90. She is not being compared to our other student, Alyssa here, who began with a composite score of 130. It's students who have the same composite scores at beginning of year are being compared to one another. Occasionally, you may have a student who is considered a highly skilled learner. Highly skilled learners are students that are already so far advanced that they may not be making statistical typical growth. If a highly skilled learner makes less than typical growth, then ALO will automatically place an asterisk next to their pathway, and you will automatically just assign them typical growth, no matter what they made. So even if they made below or well below typical growth, you're going to kind of change your mindset there. And just because they're highly skilled learners, so if they have that asterisk on their profile, you are going to consider them to be making typical growth. There is criteria to be considered both a highly skilled learner for math and for reading. You can find that criteria on page 9 of your participant notebook. It kind of just walks you through the students that would qualify for this designation. But again, know that ALO will do this automatically for you and puts that little asterisk there for them. So we are going to combine our concepts of proficiency and growth, and we are going to look at our effectiveness through growth. So we're going to start just like we did before with our well below and our below benchmark students from beginning of year to middle of year, and we're just going to ask if they are making the growth that they need to make in order to get to where we want them to be. Keep in mind that when you are looking at your students who have a red or yellow composite score, those students have to make either above typical or well above typical growth in order to close their achievement gap. So for these students with a red and yellow composite score, typical growth is not enough for them. It's not going to get them to where they need to be. When you're looking at students who have a green or blue composite score, typical growth for them is okay. Just for those reds and yellows, we really have to be progressing their growth farther in order to close that gap to get them to where they need to be. So, again, just like before, we're going to be looking at our ALO reports and filling in these charts on our participant notebooks. When we look at our effectiveness report, there is a little button on the side, and you can toggle between those rainbows, which is the composite scores that we were looking at before, or you can click on this little pathways button, and that will change it so you're looking at students' pathways rather than their composite score. But it's still listed just as like before. So you've got your cohort of red students, and it shows you which pathway they're making. So blue means well above typical growth. I have 6 students. So of my 9 who were red at beginning of year, 6 of them are making well above typical growth, which is phenomenal. That's what we want them to be making. 1 is making above typical, which is signified by that dark green. 1 student is making typical growth. None of my students are making below typical, and 1 of those 9 is making well below typical growth. So the student who is in the red and the student who is in the light green, those are my students that I need to be looking at and pushing them so they can try to close that achievement gap. So on my participant notebook, I would just list out those students who made typical or below growth. So I'm including that light green, yellow, and red together. Those are my students that aren't making enough growth that I need them to make. And then my students who made above typical or well above typical growth. So that would be my 6 here in the blue and my 1 in the dark green. So I had 7 students who are making that growth that we need them to make in order to close that achievement gap. Same thing on my yellow students here. I am going to list out the students who made typical or below, which luckily was just 1 student here making that well below. And then I can do my 2 students who made well above or above typical growth. Okay. I'm going to do that same thing for my students who are at and above benchmark. Just going to show you here on ALO again, so you can click on that A. If you need to filter down to a specific class, then you can use those filter buttons. You may not have that option if you only have 1 class listed in ALO. So again, we're going to scroll down to that effectiveness of instructional support. So we're looking at that exact same report that you were looking at before. The only difference here is right on the side, I'm going to toggle to my pathways of progress rather than my rainbow view. And once I click that, it'll take it to my pathways and show me what pathways each of my students are making. So you've got your beginning of year composite score. So these are all of my students who started red at beginning of year. I had 27 of them start red. And then it shows me what pathway they've achieved for middle of year. Just like with the rainbows, you can hover over any of those color blocks, and it is an interactive display, so it will tell you how many students. So I had 8 students who are making well below typical progress, and it will list out those students for me, those ones that I'm like, okay, I really need to work with these students because they're not making the growth they need to make. And I can hover over each of those color blocks to look at the number of students who are making each of those pathways. So again, we are going to give you about 8 minutes to fill this out in your participant notebook. We are working on pages 7, page 7 and 8. Yep, page 7 and 8. So 7 is for reading data, if that's what you're looking at. Page 8 is for our math data. So go ahead and work on filling in those charts for your students. Just notice that for your red and your yellow, we have above typical or better in this green. So remember your reds and yellows, if they're making typical growth, it's not enough for them. But when we switch to our green and blue students, it is okay for them to be making typical. So there's a little bit of an adjustment there going from your yellow to your green. Just know that yellow and red, you're still going to be counting your typical in this area where we want them to improve. When you switch to the green and blue, it's okay for them to be making typical growth. Okay, I'm going to go ahead, start our timer. You have 8 minutes to fill in those charts. As always, Jared and I are here to help and assist and do whatever we can for you. Otherwise, we'll let you have some independent work time. Okay, go ahead and wrap up that last data point that you were looking at. Okay, so we've gotten into the nitty-gritty a little bit. We have looked at the percentages of students who are making progress, those students who aren't making progress and are a little bit stagnant. So we're just going to take about 3 minutes to do another reflection on that data and some of the things that we have uncovered. So in your participant notebook, we are going to be on page 10. There's quite a few questions there. Just start working through those questions, answering them, type in here just to kind of get thinking about what that data really means and what it means for our students. Again, I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to work through those questions. Okay, I feel like that time block went by really fast. If you could just throw in the chat 0 to 5 of how many more minutes you would like to go through these questions. If you're good and don't need more time, just go ahead and put a 0. If you'd like a few more minutes to go through these reflection questions, just throw that in the chat. Okay, more time than I was originally thinking. Okay, I will go ahead and give another 5 minutes. So it's 2:24 now. Let's go ahead and do 6 minutes until 2:30, and you can still have some additional time to continue working through those reflection questions. Thank you, Kelsey and Lindsay, for letting me know. Okay, it's 2:30, so I'm gonna bring you back with me. I hope that was beneficial to have some extra time. Jared and I know that it can be really hard to carve out time in your day to look at this data and come up with plans revolving around it. So we really want this time to be meant for that, so you can just delve into your data. So I hope that that was helpful to have the additional time there. So Jared talked about tier one instruction already, and now we are going to kind of talk about our tier two instruction and our tier three instruction. So that way we can start planning some interventions to help support your students, specifically those students who are not making the progress that you want them to be making. And we're just going to quickly review tier two and tier three instruction. Tier two is based on benchmark testing, and it happens in addition to tier one. Tier three also happens in addition to tier one. Your tier one is that universal instruction that everyone is getting. Your tier two instruction should be targeted, differentiated, small group instruction. Typically, it lasts about 20 to 35 minutes and it's done 3 to 5 days a week, with that progress monitoring happening every 2 to 4 weeks, just to monitor students and make sure that it's effective and that it's working. If your progress monitoring is showing that students are not advancing in skills, then that's just a clue to us that we need to change something and do it more time effectively rather than waiting for the end of year benchmark. And then your tier three instruction is more intensive. That is typically 45 minutes to 60 minutes. It's typically happening every single day, and the progress monitoring is happening a lot more frequently as well with your tier three interventions. So if your data is showing that a student isn't growing, now it's time to look at the interventions that the student is in. So if they are in interventions and they're not growing, like I said before, that's a clue to us that something within the intervention needs to change. So that could be the duration, the frequency, the intensity. Something's not working for the student and we need to change it in order to help that student more effectively. Just make sure that when you are providing interventions to students, that those interventions are being followed with fidelity. You're using a program that is evidence-based. Make sure that you are targeting the correct skill gaps. So that's when we're talking about the reading assessment, we might need to bring in some of those diagnostic tools to really delve into the skill that they're missing. And then just keep an eye on attendance, behavior, and motivation of the student, because all of that plays in to factors when we are supporting our students. So taking everything that we have talked about today, looking at the data of our students, where they're at, where they've come from, how much they're growing, we need to ask ourselves, so what? We've looked at all of this data, so what? What do we do about it? So we're going to take about 8 minutes. We can always do a little bit more time if we need to, just like before. And we are going to start putting together that puzzle piece of our instructional planning. So on page 11 of your participant notebook, it again walks you through some steps of looking at your data and how to use that in your instructional planning. So go ahead and work through page number 11 on your participant notebook. We are going to start with 8 minutes, but at the end of that 8 minutes, I will check in with us. And if we need a little bit of extra time, we can add some more time in there. And again, I probably sound like a broken record, but if you need any help or assistance, Jared and I are here for you. Okay, that's the end of our 8 minutes there, but I know that this is when you really start getting into the thick of things and making those instructional choices that are going to impact our classrooms. So if you would like a little bit more time on this section, go ahead and throw it in the chat how many more minutes you need, just like with the previous slide, and I can give you a little bit more time if that is beneficial to you. Okay, great. I am not seeing anything in the chat, so I'm assuming that we are good to move on and continue. So now we're just going to take some time to share out some of those decisions that we made with the instructional planning portion that we just did. So just think about something that you plan to change to help improve student outcomes, and then we can get feedback from the other people who are here in the breakout session with us. So do I have anyone who is brave enough to come off of mute and let us know what you were thinking through with that last slide? What are some things that you are going to change with your instruction, thinking ahead for end of year? And then we can kind of give some feedback if necessary, or if you are struggling with something, if you're like, hey, my students are struggling in this area and I'm not sure what to do to help them, then we can also help with that.
So here in Rich, we kind of have been going down a little bit of a rabbit hole. So we kind of got off task, and I'll just be honest about that up front. Um, we don't have classroom teachers in here right now. We have instructional coach. We have our instructional coach on, that's Jackie at the other location. And then we have one of our schools, South Rich Elementary, have math and our math and literacy reading and math specialists that are here that actually do the testing. Does that make sense? So we're not classroom teachers.
Yeah.
So ask your questions, guys.
Sometimes I feel like the outcome, we say, okay, this is what the benchmark says, and then we progress monitor in between, but it's so far between progress monitors that you don't get that data to see if your changes have helped. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I have my own ideas that I can share, but before I do that, I want to just kind of open it up to the rest of the room, to the rest of the participants who are here, and see if anyone else has anything that comes to mind when you are sharing this. And thank you so much for sharing that challenge that you're faced with right now.
So one thing that we do occasionally do is test like progress monitor outside of Acadience using some other platforms, whether it's paper pencil or Canvas or a few other things that give us similar information, but that's not all the time and it's probably not the most looked at.
Thank you, JC. Okay, so my thoughts are kind of like what JC was saying of using other data points, right? Like Acadience is amazing, and I will be the first person to tell you how much I love Acadience and the Acadience assessments, but it is only one test. So you can look at other assessment data to make sure that your students are growing and progressing. Something that I always like to mention with Acadience too is the progress monitoring guidelines are really minimums. And so if you have students that you want to be progress monitoring more frequently than what the Acadience guidelines are, you can do that. Sometimes I'm a little bit hesitant to bring that up because that it can be an additional task and something else that's put onto teacher plates. I know that teachers are so busy at all as is that I don't want to be like, yeah, do more progress monitoring, right? But if you have that capability to do some more progress monitoring, those really are just minimum requirements. So you could always do more progress monitoring just to make sure, like you said, that the changes that we have put into place really are working for our students. And I kind of lean towards that. Like, I don't want to waste time, so I would rather do this progress monitoring, make sure that the changes are working. And if they're not, then my progress monitoring shows me that, and I can quickly change and implement something new. Does anyone else have any other ideas for our rich school district here, our friends together? Okay, I'm not hearing any other ideas. I hope that that helps both what myself and what JC was able to share. Hopefully that is beneficial to you. Do you have any other questions? Because I thought that you said that there was a couple.
I think that pretty much covers what we've been talking about for the last probably 20-30 minutes, trying to figure out, just how to work that out in our district. We had Jackie on the phone. She's from our district also, and so we had her on the phone. We were talking about it when we came back together. So thank you.
Awesome.
Appreciate it, Dallas.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for sharing. I love that's, the time that we have right now is to work together. More heads is always better than just one. So thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. Is there anyone else who wants to share and maybe get some ideas and feedback? All right, well, I am going to use my teacher cues and say that that wait time tells that we are good to go, ready to move on. And that actually takes us to the end of our workshop that we had today. So please, please feel free if you have any questions or if you need any help. Jared and I are more than happy to help. So please reach out to us. Let us know what we can do to help support you. I threw in the chat a link to a survey. If you could please just fill out that survey. It gives feedback to Jared and myself, letting us know how we can improve this workshop, what we can do to make it better. It will also send you an emailed certificate for 2.5 relicensure points. So if you wouldn't mind taking the time filling out that survey, once you do that, you are free to go. I also have a few extra minutes so I can sit on this Zoom if anyone has any questions that they want to ask before they log off. And again, just thank you so much for joining us today. I have really enjoyed working with you, and I hope it was beneficial to go through your Acadience data.